Welcome to Three Witches and a Druid podcast, a Canadian podcast about paganism in today's modern society. And now, Three Witches and a Druid podcast present Heilung.
Anmond und offerhirnet fila fränkebior fiotes met hornum mer morstapa set i smodig vod Forn bethviarles gearp vegnaki vilkum anfängus öfu ungementum rife mana Givilkum vehimmet resten. Oss byth ord fromma eleres pryke. Visdomes rathu und vitna frofur und eorla givam etnis och tåhit. Rat byth on räckhider rinka givilkum säfte on svithvet. Vanve sitteth on ofan. Meare megen heardum hoffar milpathas. Kein bytkvikera givam goth on fyre black und beortlik biernef oftuth verhi eflingas inne resta. Gyfo gomena bythgläng on terrenis rathu ande vyrthgippe ande vrägnachilvam har and etvist vebyth othraleas. Rekkivik Oðrumsvíkan Forðum dritten við dom sína Þett með flesk í orðan betekan Lago Bythleodum langsungithut Gifhis golonithan og nakantialtum Antiseithas vithebrigath Antsibrimhingest bridles negumed Ing was erst mit east denum Geseven segun oth hisidan est Of a väg gevat Ven eftaran Dus herdingas Dona hele nemdun Ethel Byth offerle of ekvilkommen Gif himot verites Ant gerisena on Brokan On bolde bleatum oftast Deg Byth dritne sånt De åre manum Mer med oss leot Myrkth ant tohit Eatkum ant earmum Ealum brike Ak Byth on jorthan elda bjarnum Fleskes fodor Fereth gelome Offerganotes beth Garsek fandath Vither Ag hebe ethele triove Esk Byth offerhia Eldum dyre Stith on stathole Stederite hylt Vea him fiotan on fyra småninge Ur Byth ethelinga ant eorla gives Vun ant vyrth mynt Byth on vikke feger Festlig on ferelde Fyrt geativa sum Ear Byth eafix Ant thea abruketh Fodres on foldan hafath Fegerne eart Vetre bevorpen Ver hevinum leofath Iar Bythea orlakivilkon Thonne festlige flesk ongineth Ravkoljan, Rusan, Kiosan, Plaktogebedan, Bleda Gedriosath, Vina Givitath, Vera Gesvikath. Ravkoljan, Rusan, Kiosan, Plaktogebedan, Bleda Gedriosath, Vina Givitath, Vera Gesvikath. Ravkoljan, Rusan, Kiosan, Plaktogebedan, Bleda Gedriosath, Vina Givitath, Vera Gesvikath. Vera Gesvikath.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Three Witches and a Druid, where we sit around the table. We had some lovely garden-grown homemade carrot soup, and we're all souped up and ready to go to talk about our experiences as modern pagans. My name is Margot.
And I'm Maeve.
Gwen.
And I'm Brian. That was really good. Souped up and ready to go.
Good fun.
So today's episode is about, you say it, because this was your idea.
Oh, I got it off a list of suggested ideas from elsewhere. So thank you to whatever listener. But is paganism instinctual or learned? Are you born with it? Do you learn it?
Are you born with it? Is it made?
Get out of my head.
She's born with it. It's Maybelline.
You were thinking Maybelline. I was thinking Lady Gaga song. I'm born that way.
Yeah. Can both be true?
I
Yes.
think
Definitely.
I
Yeah.
think it's a combination of nature and nurture.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, I didn't know as a child I was pagan, but I certainly knew the Catholic situation did not speak to me or give me any comfort or support or growth. I knew there had to be something out there for me, or at least I hoped I did. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't still be here. But it wasn't till I was introduced to the concept of paganism, which I came into fairly late in my life. Well, like 30. That I didn't even know that was an option. I can remember in Winnipeg many a winter being absolutely distraught that there was no magic left in the world anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I do actually have a painting that my then boyfriend did for me because he really hoped that would help me see that there was still magic in the world. But I was just devastated. And it wasn't until I came to paganism that I realized that it was a thing and it was worth exploring. And look at me now.
Well, when you said that, no magic left in the world, made me think of that little movie, Rise of the Guardians, with Jack Frost and Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. And it's interesting you say that when you thought there was no magic in the world because you probably weren't looking at little things that are incredibly magical.
Exactly.
Because it would have never been occurred to you to pay attention to the frost on the window.
Yes.
That made me think of the Jack Frost kind of, because you said Winterpeg. That made me think really cold and whatnot. I think it can go both ways. I think a lot of times I had no idea. I knew I had a spirituality within me and I knew I loved nature and whatnot, but I didn't know what a pagan was either till I was, 21-ish or something like that. But I also think that you have you have two probably generations of children too being raised pagan. And I do think that even if people might not have known they were pagan and they came to it later and learned it, when you're raised from it, I think that raising a child and a person in paganism is so much more natural. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because we have that whole connection, animism, science has proven it, what are cells made of, what are atoms made of, everything is all made of energy and we're all that thing. So I think that's easier. I think it's easier to teach someone because once you start teaching them what to look for, it comes very naturally. What we like for kids.
In my head, somehow, paganism equals compassion. So I would think, I've never raised a child of my own. I don't know. But would a child be raised in paganism be maybe raised with more compassion than a child raised in the Muggle world?
Well,
I'd like to think so, but as a grove with a lot of children, I don't know if that's necessarily
because human nature is human nature. But
yeah.
I suppose if you were raised with zero religion,
right now, I'm not saying
as
that
opposed
the boys
to a
in
raised
the grove are bad, but there are 3 6-year-old boys who are pretty much just hell on wheels
because they have been empowered their whole life.
Oh yeah.
I think most 6-year-olds can be hell on wheels too. They're pretty
it was
crazy.
Funny. Not funny, but interesting. The other day we were up in the business park and we were driving past the Walmart and there was a family outside that were looking for money because they were homeless at this point. So we didn't have any cash on us, but we stopped in, and this is not a pat myself on the back. I'm proud of the second part of the story. We were stopping at the superstore and we ended up getting them like a $25 gift card. So we drove back and gave it to them. And then Atticus in the back had said, okay, so we've done something good now. What did we get? And I used Minecraft experience as an explanation for karma. That now that we've done a good thing, he now becomes a better person. And that's what he gets. He becomes a better person. And I felt...
Did he get that?
He does, because I explained to him, like, when you
in
kill
language
monster,
he understands.
in Minecraft, you get the little experience bubble and ding, you level up. So I said, you've leveled up a little bit.
That's a
you've
good
done-
one for
because
people
you've
to
done
remember.
A good thing. That's the part I'm proud of. It's the explanation.
Yeah.
So I would say that the children in our grove are a bit more compassionate. They're a bit more aware of nature. They are, and I'm not saying that other people's children are terrible. Like my kid can be terrible on the right given day. But like all the kids in the grove, they often pick up garbage and are aware of nature around them and are aware of the trees and the plants, and they all garden, and these are just things they're aware of. Atticus is still afraid of bugs, but he's not going to squish a bug.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but that's if you're brought up into a world where it's important to the adults around you, then it becomes important to you. So that kind of makes sense. The whole nature nurture thing, I was thinking of a podcast that's kind of pagan adjacent, Rune Soup. Gordon White asks his guests, were you a weird kid? And it seems like everybody, it's an awesome starter, right? Question.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like people that choose an alternative spiritual path, like many of the pagan paths, had experiences as a child in the sense that their grandfather who had passed away would visit them, or there was a haunted house, or they would astral travel when they were sleeping, or, all of those sorts of things. And I think children have these experiences that, quotation marks, as we mature sort of thing, that process of growing up, you leave those childish things behind, but those childish things are maybe a clearer view of the world than other. So I think that's true. But the learned part is you can instinctually create relationships in your environment. But if you think, well, I really like Scotch, so this minnow in the pond beside me, he'll like it too. Like you need to learn as well. You may have that instinctual or intuitive.
I don't like Scotch at all.
Intuitive impulse, but there should be some follow-up.
You need to learn how to channel that.
You need to learn if you're going to go out and say, I'm going to try entheogens and I'm going to collect my own. I want a mushroom guide before I do that. I'm not going out and so learning is an important part.
And a lot of it, most children see things I used the things in my bedroom at night were crazy. I think we talked about this on an episode not too long ago, but you lose it if it's not nurtured. Yeah. So I completely lost it because I was not raised in a home like, oh, honey, that's just your imagination, which made me more frightened. But then you have to work to get it back, and then you need to learn.
Yeah.
You have to work and you need to learn from somebody or through books or whatever the case might be. You have to learn to get it back.
I was really lucky because I grew up in the big city of Charlottetown, PEI, with the whole 2 stop signs. But I'd spend my summers in the country in Oyster Bed Bay, Oyster Bed Bridge. We learned so many things that looking back on it were like very pagan. Cows lay down in the field. You know the bad weather's coming.
You wouldn't believe how many people don't believe me when I've said that.
That
I'm on the highway or driving somewhere. I'm like, oh, look, the cows are lying down. It's going to rain.
Yeah.
And I've been called bullshit on that so many times.
And how many times have you been proven
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
There is a local news person. I forget her name. Cindy Day. She did a little book called Grandma Says. She's a weather person. That's it. She's a weather lady. And she did a book on Grandma Says and the weather, which is, and I got it from my mother because she was very excited about that idea. And all these little things they're saying. Oh, if the sparks go up the stovepipe this way, this is going to happen, and this and this, and the leaves, and it was very interesting.
There was a lot of things like my grandfather taught us never to step in circles of mushrooms. That was a big deal. Had to respect a tree that was in the field that often stood alone, because it was often the strongest tree.
I think Maeve and your grandfather would get along. He has a lot of respect for the faith.
Well, also, if there is a tree supposedly in the middle of a field all alone, it's also thought to be a fairy mound.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's why you said stay.
So in the backfield of our farm was a giant maple tree all by itself, and every cow would crawl under it when it was too hot, and they'd crawl under it when it was raining. And my grandfather said, whatever you do, that's the most respected tree on the property, and take care of it. Now, also at the same time, this man would be the type who would say, touch that electric fence and let me know if it's off. So,
how many times did you touch the fence?
More than I'm willing to admit.
Did you ever play the chain game on the fence?
I think me and my uncle did a few times. I have an uncle who is only like a year older than me, and we did a lot of really dumb things.
When I lived in Belgium, the little housing community, and it was an international housing community off base, but there was a big, huge farm behind it with an electric fence. And whenever a new kid moved in the neighborhood, we would all join hands and stick the new kid at the end. And so the first one would touch the fence, and that poor little kid on the end felt it.
So the other terrible story is there used to be a bull on the side field, and the side field had it wasn't the big maple tree. It was another tree, but it wasn't that big. And my grandfather would say, "Do not go in that field. Do not go in that field." And me and my uncle were dummies and went in that field, and we got chased up the tree by the bull. And my grandfather made us sit out there for 5 hours, sit in the tree.
He was a pagan.
Yeah, and then eventually, Grandma made him come out and get us, and he just walked into the field, and the bull didn't go near him.
He'd already established dominance.
He had led us back to the farmhouse, but the bull didn't go near him.
No.
Yeah. But the bull was under that tree the whole time for 5 hours. We were like, oh, what are we going to do?
Okay, that's really funny.
But yeah, also at the same time, I had a great grandmother. She had a chicken, a monkey, and I think a raccoon. And these animals didn't live outside; they lived in her house.
So you were a weird kid, Brian.
Yeah, I had a weird family, but religion was never a part of my family. No one ever went to church. And now growing up, I'm like, oh, they were a bunch of weird pagans.
Yeah, I think they may have been.
I don't think they knew what it was. It was just farmland for them.
Yeah.
Well, that is very true, because I'm from the valley, which is a farming area, and people do all these. You got to plant this, you got to do this. If there's a cow, and whatever, and it's all folk magic. Yeah. It's all folk magic. And my British grandmother was very folk magic-y, not so much folk magic-y, folk superstitious-y.
Yeah.
I knew all the little things. And her husband, my grandfather, was as big a pagan as ever walked, but you would have never known that.
Not identified.
No, he had no idea. He was totally into every animal and every tree. And
yeah,
that kind of
Yes,
idea.
my mom had a big struggle with me coming out as pagan and trying to understand. And one of her ways of easing herself into that process, I think, is I would get the Farmer's Almanac in my Christmas stocking every year. Because she really felt that was pagan.
A good crossover.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a good way of timing ritual and everything else. Yeah, very useful.
Yeah.
Very useful.
That is very good, because it has the moons and the this, because that's very big. Even, you go to you go to Newfoundland. Oh, you can't plant a tree unless it's this time of the moon. Yeah. Someone was saying that to me.
What?
And no,
I've never heard that.
That's because a lot of places on the western coast of Newfoundland have very few. It's trees, rock, and bog.
Yeah.
So in some places, especially poor Port aux Basques, that has just taken a terrible beating from the storm, there's not a tree bigger than a shrub. So people try to plant a tree, but it's got to be at the right time of the moon. And someone said, don't you do that in Nova Scotia? I said, where I'm from, you got to cut down a tree to do anything.
Trees are weeds.
Yeah.
This is a fun city, this episode.
No, I think it can be a combo.
Yeah.
I truly, though, and I remember when I first kind of came out and met other people and all that, and it all just made so much sense to me. I remember being, in my earlier 20s, that when other people didn't get it or didn't feel it, I thought that was just the strangest thing in the world. I thought it was truly the strangest thing in the world, because it just seemed so natural to me. So I guess part of it must be innate.
I was just thinking, I had this story. So as we mentioned in the past, I was a property manager for about a decade, several years ago. And I was in an apartment with one of the cleaners, and they were getting it ready to turn over. And so she was vacuuming the carpets and everything, and she had brought her toddler to work with her often, and he'd be playing in the corner. So I went in and we were talking about what she'd discovered and what needed to be done in the apartment. And the vacuum cleaner had been unplugged, and we just sat down on the carpet and kind of roughed out a plan for the place. And her 2.5-year-old kind of was toddling around the whole time. He picked up the cord from the vacuum and he made a circle on the ground, a rough circle around us, and put himself inside. And he said, "Now we're safe." That is innate, right?
Yeah.
That's innate.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, if there is something there
Mhm.
that he felt safe in the circle. Now, hopefully if this is his path and he continues down, he's not going to make them out of vacuum cleaner cords, and he's going to learn a few good meditation techniques and visualization and raising energy. But the impulse was innate.
there.
Mhm.
You know, I used to, because I wanted to stay home after my child was born, and I took care of children for several years. I've never met a non-magical child.
I agree.
Never. And I've had them from, babe in arms up to, preteen come to my house, and I have never met a non-magical child.
Yeah.
Truly never. Now, many of them maybe their parents don't take them to any kind of church. They have no spirituality. Every one of them has it. That's why I'll often say, if you have an altar set up, if you have like a wand or something, I would never let my daughter play with my wand because kids just have so much magical energy. It's like, no, I kept things like that.
Exactly.
Completely out of.
It's
We're
not
totally
because you
opposite.
don't
I think
believe
Atticus
it.
has 4 wands down there.
Well, she could have her own wand,
Yeah.
but my wand was made of copper and filled with
And
quartz
consecrated
crystals
and-
and has a lot of zippity doo dah to
You
it. She
don't-
wants to make
It's-
her own
You don't
little
want
one.
them to play with magic, not because you don't believe it's real, but because
you
you do
do.
believe it's real.
And we had they want to go out in the backyard and find a nice, stick and let's put ribbons on this. It's going to be our magic wand. Fine, that's fine. But they weren't playing with that.
Yeah.
Or my thame or whatnot.
Yeah.
But no, children, I've never met a non-magical child. It's just once they get past 10, 11, then everything, society kind of moves in. Their
So,
parents move in.
I would say there's probably Samhain and Yule pagans, just as there's Christmas and Easter Christians.
Mhm.
So there's not a level of you have to in your practice, but do you think there's a level of learning or exploration that's necessary? Because it's
do.
it's such an aesthetic now, and people will call themselves that and align with an aesthetic. And that's great. That's fine. But if you say this is my religion, how much do you have to show up or put into it? Well, like anything else, what you put in is what you get out.
That's right. I think it's how much do you want to get out of it?
Yeah.
I mean,
And
there's
the
plenty.
whole process of life is learning and growing.
Mhm.
Why would you not want to learn and grow within your
Mhm.
spiritual path as
Mhm.
well? It's funny. My brother was saying, as we were preparing to go to the gravesite this weekend, he was saying how nervous he was, and he doesn't get nervous about stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm really uptight about this. I'm kind of tense and nervous. And I explained to him, I said, in my spiritual practice, if I don't get uptight and nervous before a ritual or spell work or even a public gathering, then it's not worth me doing.
Yeah.
If I get to the point where everything is just so completely blasé, I'm done with it. It doesn't mean anything to me anymore. And I think sort of the learning aspect of that goes along with that. If you're not, and I'm not saying, you need to study a chapter a night or need to be
No.
constantly journaling or anything, but I've always been a person for reference books. I mean, even before the internet, if somebody asked me a question, I went and looked it up in an encyclopedia
Yeah.
or in an atlas. Like I always had to go find out. So again, in my spiritual path, if somebody talks about an experience they've had or something they're curious about, that just ignites the fire in me to also want to go, okay, what does that mean? Where did that come from? And what can I learn from that?
Mhm.
I was raised I went to Sunday school and church as a child and whatnot. And I think that might be one of the things. I have almost never met a pagan. I don't know if I ever have. who isn't interested in learning more
Mm-hmm.
about the things that we are involved in. It's like, oh, you know what? I now would like to, after, 30 years, it's like, I'd like to learn a little more about shamanism, or I'd like to learn a little more about, I don't know, a different pantheon, or I'd like to learn about Reiki, or I don't think I've ever met someone in the pagan community who didn't.
The interfaith chaplains at the prisons all say to me, Gwen, your guys are the ones that want to, they're always looking for more books, more material, more thing to read. And part of that is we're fish out of water in the sense that we don't even have a baseline until we've learned it, in a sense, And
this is not to diss anybody else. What I'm about to say, what you're comfortable with is what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I know plenty of, relatives or plenty of people who've been going to church every day of their, every Sunday of their life for 75 years.
Them comfort, and that's
it does give them comfort, but they've never done a Bible study.
Yeah.
They've never explored anything further. They've never done further reading. And that's okay if that's their thing. I have a friend of mine way back when I was into paganism for several years. And she said to me, we were talking about, she says, I really do think your religion is really cool. And I believe a lot of it, but it's way too much work. She says to me, religion is going to church on Sunday and then not worrying about it the rest of the time. And I believe maybe what I believe, but that's it. But she was comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But I've known so many people most people I know have never read, Christian people have never read the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Never read the Bible, never explored, never looked, why is this? How is this? Or even...
And this is not a judgment. There's lots of pagans.
Not a judgment. A lot of pagans too.
who've
Lots
never
of
read
pagans.
Scott Cunningham either.
Yeah, there is. But but the thing is, I find most pagans are always interested in something new. And
here we are talking
time.
about learning, and we have a druid, and he hasn't contributed. And I think druids are like the pinnacle of learning.
Yeah.
Like, who bought more books at the bookstore, Margot, than druids?
Yeah.
Well, and it was really hard at first to convince them to have a druid section.
Oh,
and
I
eventually,
worked. Yeah.
Eventually, it came in, and it was like, oh, there's shamanism.
Well, I think part of it is because nobody was writing books.
No, there wasn't. Now there's a ton of
Yes.
Yeah.
It
And
took a long
much.
time for authors to start.
Yeah.
To do
Understand
Yes.
that people wanted to read that.
Yeah.
But
I've completed my ADF Dedekin program, which involves a lot of books. And I'm currently working on my ADF clergy program, which involves a lot of books. Part of the issue is a lot of those books are getting very expensive.
they're out of print.
So, they're out of print and they're hard to find. So I have a book downstairs. I think it's like $300 on Amazon right now.
Yikes.
I didn't pay $300 for it. I got it for $30 15 years
I was
ago,
afraid
but-
you'd sold a kidney or something.
Yeah.
We have
The
to-
question is, can they not update their reading list maybe?
To something
for
more
the
that's what I was just
modern
about
ones.
to say is at the moment ADF is in the midst of possibly looking into that because
There's a lot of new writing.
a lot. The reality is that there's nothing wrong with the older books. It's just if you can't access them, they're no good to anybody. But one of my personal favorite things is collecting books. I try to get through them all. I'm not one of those types that puts a bunch of books on display. It's like, oh, I read all this. No, I haven't read half of them, but I still own them and I love them, and I'll eventually read them.
You'll get to it eventually.
Yeah, and I'm a big person that takes notes in the books so I can go back.
Yeah.
But in Druidry, there's a lot of study programs, and not every Druid has to study. A lot of hedge Druids will avoid that, but it's quite common within OBOD and ADF. There are various study programs.
Yeah, a lot of witches too will be, they're hedge witches, whatever feels right, whatever the earth is telling them.
Yeah.
Or some people, I knew a person who identified as tree taught. They were taught by nature, tree taught, taught by nature. They didn't, read whatever, and that's okay too.
That was something I meant to mention in the last episode with the magical names, is that a lot of Druids, the ones who did say they had magical or craft names, often said they came from the grove, and they're referring to their trees, not not their people.
Yeah.
No, I understand that. I have so many thoughts about it, but I'm not completely sure how to get it all out. I think it's both. As I was saying earlier, that when I came to it all and I try to explain it to people, and they're looking at you like you have 5 heads. And I didn't understand why this didn't make sense to them. And I think a lot of the time too is people might sort of on an academic kind of level go, yeah, that kind of does make sense, because how does that go? You know, what are things made of? Because we're all 98 point something percent energy from the table to this mic to us. So we're all connected. So they find it very interesting academically, but it wouldn't be a spiritual path they would want for whatever reason.
But for some people, definitely in Druidry, the academic path is the path to spirituality.
That's true, because the Druids were the keepers of the law.
Yeah.
They were the keepers of the records.
It's just 2022, and we realized maybe not writing stuff down wasn't a great idea.
That's really true. Yeah, because you were supposed to have everything memorized. Because when the Romans came and they had everything written down, they thought, well, what's wrong with your scribes?
Yeah.
You know, you can't remember.
That didn't work out well.
No, that didn't work out so well.
But at the same time, like one of the often biggest complaints about ADF is that it's sometimes too academic. That there's too much of an emphasis on the academia, the studying, the learning. But that is definitely, you're right, it's definitely a Druid. I wouldn't say a Druid trait. I think other paths had that as well.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely Temple of Witchcraft is big in the study.
And Chris Penzak's books are very good.
They are.
They're excellent. I
Mostly.
I find I've read several of them. We've worked through some of, we thought, let's
use
do
them
this,
as book clubs. Yeah.
Yeah, book clubs, and I've enjoyed them.
Yeah.
But I find even any ritual you're going to lead, I find it's always so interesting to be inspired by something new and explore and research and come up with a new idea. You don't want to do the same Yule ritual every year. You want something different to explore. You don't want to do the same Ostara every year. Sometimes you want a man painted gold from head to toe.
Oh, that was awesome ritual. That was an awesome ritual with the big gold wings. Oh, we have done some funky shit, man. Just wait till festival next year.
Yeah.
But it's always nice to explore new ideas and research what other people have done. And can you take some little nugget of what they've discovered on their journey and use it as a springboard from your journey? And where will that take you forward?
I think that's one of the great things, especially if you're an eclectic witch or eclectic pagan. You can beg, borrow, and steal from anywhere. It's not exactly the same thing every time. It's like, well, I really like that idea from TOW, but I like this BTW, British traditional, but I like Temple of Witchcraft thing, this suggestion they had. Or maybe the Norse, the Asatru had an idea. Maybe, the Dianics had an idea. I like that it isn't strict and it is new. Yeah. And you can go through phases of, I'm interested in this and see how this is going. Maybe it sticks with you. Maybe it's like, nope, but I have that knowledge now.
And that's the thing. Not everybody is going to resonate with, not everything is going to resonate with everybody. So just because this worked for your best friend when she did her ritual to study for her final exam doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. Yes. You can take aspects of what she did and what worked for her and transform it into something that's going to work for you as well. And I think that's where a lot of the learning can come from.
And I think for me, that really appeals to my rebellious spirit. Because if anybody told me this is our only dogma, or this is exactly how you have to do it, I would be out of there.
No, and that doesn't fly
at all. No.
So, we've discussed this before, ADF often has a structured ritual system, but it's not because of dogma or it's for accessibility. And that's the only reason it's there. The joke is with any pagan, you ask 10 pagans what they believe in, you'll get 50 answers. It's the same with Druidry. Just because we all follow the same ritual structure doesn't mean much. We all believe something different.
And that's the fun part, I think. It appeals to my more free spirit. Yeah.
So I guess in the end, the answer here is while it is intuitive, there's a lot of learning. Yeah.
Very well said.
It's often a lot of learning being passed down from generation to generation.
Now it is.
Now it is, yeah.
Now it is, yeah. But it's interesting, and it's too bad I wasn't older. My great-grandmother, my mother's paternal grandmother, was as big a witch as ever walked because she did everything. She did all these things. But she was a very good Christian woman who cleaned the church every Saturday for the service the next day.
Yeah.
And my mother went to a summer solstice ritual once years and years ago. And she just like, oh, my grandmother would have got this. So it's I find it so interesting that so much of it is there, especially with people who live in the country.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But when you put a name on it,
Well, that's
People are
where
like,
the word
what the
pagan
hell?
comes from.
yeah, a country dweller. Yeah. It's very interesting. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. And I will repeat, as I did in the last one, for anyone who may have listened to our last podcast, that I did do on October the 14th, I did do a continuation, I should say, of our elemental episodes with dealing with elemental deficiencies. And you can find that at ckdu.ca. And it is the witching hour. And you would look for the October 14th, 2022 episode. And if you have any questions or comments, we're always happy to hear from people. That what we were talking about tonight was a suggestion from others, because
Just episode.
because if you don't, you could be getting something really, really, really wackadoodle.
We do have a few coming up that were listener suggestions.
Excellent.
Accessibility and ritual and paganism is a big one that'll be coming up very shortly.
Excellent, excellent. And so we were always open for suggestions, and constructive, polite criticism is also okay as well. Notice I said constructive and polite.
Three Witches and a Druid podcast would like to take a moment to shout out to our amazing Patreon supporters from all around the world. Today, Margot, Gwen, Maeve, and Brian would like to welcome our newest Patreons, Chris, Stephanie Matthew, Samantha Brooks, and Thomas Wilding. Without your generous contributions, now and over the past 2 seasons, we could not bring you this magical content, and we thank you once again for listening.
So until next time, everybody, merry meet
Merry part.
and merry meet again.
Blessed be.
This has been 3 Witches and a Druid podcast. Thanks for listening.